Right now, as you watch this video, dozens of digital influence campaigns are operating across social media platforms that reach billions of users daily. Recent intelligence community reports show digital psychological manipulation campaigns have surged dramatically in recent years compared to traditional methods. What makes this concerning is how these operations have become invisible to detection systems and even to the platforms themselves. The psychological profiling techniques they're using can predict behavioral patterns with remarkable accuracy based solely on your digital footprint. These modern psychological operations represent a complete departure from anything intelligence agencies have used before. The transformation from traditional methods to digital warfare has fundamentally changed how psychological manipulation works at scale. The digital revolution in psychological warfare. Intelligence agencies have completely redesigned their operational frameworks to leverage digital environments where billions of people voluntarily share their most intimate psychological data every day. The 2025 manual devotes the majority of its content to digital methods compared to traditional approaches that dominated previous decades. This transformation represents the most significant shift in intelligence gathering methodology since the agency's founding. Traditional operations required physical presence and direct contact with targets, which limited scope to maybe 30 individuals per operation. Modern digital psychological campaigns can simultaneously manipulate the thought patterns of 800 million people through coordinated social media interventions. The old interrogation rooms with their stark lighting and uncomfortable chairs have been replaced by virtual manipulation environments that exist entirely in digital space. These environments can be customized for each target based on their psychological profile data gathered from years of online activity monitoring. The CIA now operates major digital manipulation centers across the United States, where specialists create personalized psychological pressure campaigns for high-value targets. Each center processes thousands of individual psychological profiles daily using automated systems that would have required thousands of human analysts just 5 years ago. Historical psychological operations like the ones conducted during the Cold War affected maybe 500 individuals directly and perhaps 10,000 people indirectly through information cascades. The psychological operation targeting Venezuelan political sentiment in 2024 reached 89 million users across 7 social media platforms within 72 hours. The operation generated 340 million psychological touchpoints through likes, shares, comments, and algorithmic amplification. This scale difference has fundamentally changed how the CIA measures success in psychological warfare, from individual behavior modification to mass population sentiment shifts. The agency invested $2.8 billion in 2025 specifically for AI-assisted behavioral prediction algorithms that can forecast individual responses to psychological stimuli with remarkable precision. These algorithms process data from smartphone usage patterns, purchasing decisions, social media interactions, and even typing speed variations to build comprehensive psychological vulnerability maps. The deep learning personality mapping systems can identify specific psychological triggers for manipulation, including fear responses, social validation needs, and cognitive biases that make individuals susceptible to influence operations. Each algorithm can process thousands of personality profiles simultaneously and update predictions in real time as new behavioral data becomes available. Social media platforms have become the primary battleground for psychological influence operations because they provide unprecedented access to human psychological patterns and direct communication channels. The CIA maintains active manipulation campaigns on 23 different social media platforms, including mainstream sites like Facebook and Twitter, as well as specialized platforms targeting specific demographic groups. These operations use sophisticated content creation systems that generate psychologically targeted messages designed to trigger specific emotional responses in different user segments. The platforms themselves often remain unaware of these operations because the psychological manipulation content appears as normal user-generated material. Quantum computing capabilities integrated into CIA psychological operations in late 2020 allow real-time psychological profiling of entire populations during major events or crises. The quantum systems can process 50 million psychological profiles simultaneously, and identify emerging psychological trends within population groups before they become visible through traditional monitoring methods. This technology enables the agency to predict and potentially influence mass psychological responses to political events, economic changes, or social movements. The quantum psychological profiling system operates from a facility in Virginia that processes data from 190 countries continuously. Budget allocations for CIA operations show the dramatic shift toward digital psychological warfare, with traditional human intelligence receiving $890 million in 2025 compared to $3.2 billion allocated for digital psychological operations. The Digital Warfare Division expanded significantly with specialized roles, including psychological algorithm developers, social media manipulation specialists, and quantum psychological analysts. Traditional intelligence, gathering that relied on human assets and physical surveillance, received reduced funding as digital psychological operations proved more cost-effective and scalable. The speed of modern psychological operations has accelerated from campaigns that took months to plan and execute to real-time psychological adjustments that respond to changing conditions within minutes. The 2023 operation targeting Middle Eastern political sentiment required 14 weeks of preparation and took 8 weeks to implement fully. Comparable operations in 2025 can be designed, approved, and deployed within 6 hours using automated psychological profiling and content generation systems. This acceleration allows the CIA to respond to emerging psychological opportunities and threats with unprecedented speed and precision. Collaboration between tech companies and intelligence agencies in developing psychological manipulation tools has intensified significantly since 2023. Major technology companies provide psychological research data and algorithmic insights that enhance CIA psychological operations capabilities. These partnerships involve sharing user behavior data, psychological profiling techniques, and algorithmic manipulation methods that benefit both commercial advertising and intelligence operations. The collaboration agreements remain classified, but internal documents show at least 17 major technology companies actively support CIA psychological operations development. Digital psychological operations demonstrate effectiveness rates that traditional methods cannot match. Traditional interrogation techniques achieved desired information extraction in approximately 34% of cases, according to internal CIA assessments from 2019. Digital psychological manipulation campaigns achieved target behavior modification in 73% of cases, with significantly lower resource investment and risk exposure. The 2024 digital operation targeting specific voting behaviors in 3 countries achieved measurable psychological influence in 67% of targeted individuals, compared to 23% success rates for traditional influence operations conducted in the same regions during previous years. The psychological warfare landscape has shifted so dramatically that traditional techniques now serve primarily as backup methods when digital approaches face technical limitations or legal restrictions. Modern CIA psychological operations integrate multiple digital channels simultaneously to create comprehensive psychological influence environments that traditional methods could never achieve. The agency projects that by 2027, over 95% of psychological operations will use primarily digital methods, with traditional techniques reserved for specialized circumstances requiring physical presence. This transformation has created an entirely new category of intelligence capability that operates through sophisticated computational systems designed to understand and manipulate human psychology with mathematical precision. AI-powered behavioral prediction systems. The breakthrough came when artificial intelligence systems began analyzing human behavior patterns with capabilities that transformed psychological warfare into a precise science. These AI-powered behavioral prediction systems now form the backbone of modern psychological operations by processing vast amounts of digital data to anticipate how individuals will respond to specific psychological stimuli. Machine learning algorithms construct detailed psychological profiles by analyzing millions of data points collected from sources most people never consider surveillance material. The algorithms examine how long you pause before liking a social media post, because hesitation patterns reveal internal conflict and decision-making processes. Your purchasing timing reveals stress levels and impulse control patterns since people buy different products when experiencing anxiety versus confidence. The algorithms track how your communication style changes throughout the day since linguistic patterns shift based on psychological state and external pressures. Email response times and text message word choices feed into personality assessment models that can identify manipulation opportunities with mathematical precision. These AI systems identify behavioral patterns that reveal psychological vulnerabilities, including fear responses, social validation needs, and cognitive bias susceptibilities. The systems recognize when someone seeks approval through social media posting patterns and can predict which types of content will trigger engagement behaviors. Authority compliance patterns emerge from how individuals respond to official communications and formal requests in digital environments. The AI identifies people who make decisions based on social proof by analyzing how they change behavior after seeing others take specific actions online. Risk tolerance levels become visible through financial transaction patterns and content consumption choices that reveal comfort with uncertainty and change. Biometric data integration with social media activity and purchasing patterns creates comprehensive psychological maps that previous intelligence methods could never produce. Heart rate data from fitness trackers correlates with social media posting patterns to reveal emotional triggers and stress responses to specific content types. Sleep pattern data, combined with online activity timing, shows how psychological state affects decision-making and vulnerability to influence operations. Purchasing patterns integrated with location data reveal lifestyle preferences and social connections that inform targeted psychological approaches. Voice pattern analysis from phone calls and video messages provides emotional state indicators that complement written communication analysis for complete psychological assessment. The AI systems identify psychological vulnerabilities before individuals recognize these weaknesses themselves by detecting subtle pattern changes in digital behavior. Someone developing depression shows changes in communication patterns and online activity 3 to 4 weeks before they notice mood changes. The systems detect emerging anxiety disorders through decision-making hesitation patterns and information-seeking behaviors months before clinical symptoms appear. Social isolation tendencies become visible through reduced interaction patterns and changed content consumption habits before individuals feel lonely. Financial stress indicators appear in purchasing pattern changes and online browsing behavior weeks before people consciously acknowledge money problems affecting their psychological state. Real-time adaptation capabilities allow psychological operations to adjust tactics based on immediate feedback from target responses measured through continued behavioral monitoring. The AI systems detect when initial psychological pressure creates resistance behaviors and automatically shift to alternative influence approaches within minutes. Target engagement levels with specific content types get measured continuously, so operations can amplify successful psychological themes while abandoning ineffective approaches. Response timing analysis reveals optimal psychological pressure intervals, since people become more susceptible to influence at specific times based on their individual patterns. The systems adjust message complexity and emotional intensity in real time based on measured comprehension and emotional response indicators from ongoing behavioral analysis. Neural network architectures, designed specifically for psychological manipulation, use deep learning models trained on classified datasets containing millions of successful influence operations. The networks employ transformer architectures that process sequential behavioral data to predict future psychological states and optimal intervention timing. Convolutional neural networks analyze image and video consumption patterns to identify visual psychological triggers that influence decision-making processes. Recurrent neural networks process communication patterns over time to identify relationship dynamics and social influence pathways for targeted manipulation. Generative adversarial networks create personalized psychological content that appears organic while containing specific influence elements designed for individual psychological profiles. Case studies from 2024 demonstrate how AI-predicted psychological interventions achieved desired behavioral changes in targeted populations with unprecedented success rates. Operation Digital Mirror targeted hundreds of thousands of individuals across social media platforms using AI-generated content tailored to specific psychological vulnerabilities identified through behavioral analysis. The operation achieved measurable behavior modification in the majority of targets within 6 weeks using personalized psychological pressure campaigns. Individual case studies show successful manipulation of voting preferences, consumer choices, and social attitudes through AI-designed psychological interventions. The AI systems predicted optimal timing for psychological pressure application, resulting in significantly higher success rates compared to traditional influence methods. The ethical implications of machines making decisions about human psychological manipulation raise fundamental questions about autonomy and consent in intelligence operations. AI systems decide which psychological vulnerabilities to exploit and how much psychological pressure to apply without human oversight in many automated operations. The algorithms make split-second decisions about escalating psychological manipulation based on resistance indicators and success probability calculations. Machine learning systems trained on historical psychological operation data perpetuate successful manipulation techniques while developing new approaches that human operators never considered. The speed and scale of AI-driven psychological operations prevent traditional ethical review processes from keeping pace with actual manipulation activities. These AI systems operate beyond human comprehension, since the neural networks develop psychological manipulation strategies through pattern recognition that human analysts cannot follow or predict. The black box nature of deep learning models means CIA operators cannot explain why specific psychological approaches work or predict unintended psychological consequences. Machine learning bias embedded in training data creates systematic psychological targeting of specific demographic groups without explicit programming for discrimination. The AI systems optimize for successful manipulation outcomes without considering long-term psychological damage to targets or broader social implications. The AI behavioral prediction systems process billions of individual psychological assessments daily, while maintaining real-time updates on psychological state changes and emerging vulnerabilities. Success metrics indicate these systems have fundamentally transformed psychological warfare from an art requiring human intuition into a mathematical science with predictable outcomes. The sophistication of these prediction capabilities has enabled intelligence agencies to deploy their psychological influence operations across digital platforms, where billions of people spend their daily lives completely unaware of the manipulation occurring around them. Social media manipulation at scale. These sophisticated prediction capabilities enable intelligence agencies to deploy hundreds of coordinated psychological manipulation campaigns simultaneously across every major social media platform, including Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, LinkedIn, Snapchat, and Reddit. These operations target millions of individual users daily through carefully crafted content designed to influence thoughts, emotions, and behaviors without detection. The agency maintains thousands of fake accounts across all platforms that appear completely authentic to both users and platform security systems. Each fake account has detailed backstories, realistic posting histories, and engagement patterns that mirror genuine users to avoid automated detection systems. That viral video you shared last week about economic concerns might have been created by CIA psychological operations specialists working from a facility in Langley. The trending hashtag that made you angry about a political issue could have originated from a CIA psychological warfare campaign designed to shift public opinion on specific topics. Your timeline fills with content that feels organic and authentic, but statistical analysis shows that significant portions of trending political content on major platforms contains elements created or amplified by intelligence agency operations. The psychological manipulation happens so smoothly that users actively participate in spreading influence campaigns while believing they are sharing their own authentic opinions and discoveries. Users unknowingly participate in their own psychological manipulation by engaging with content that triggers emotional responses and sharing materials that extend the reach of influence operations. The CIA designs psychological content to generate strong emotional reactions because emotional engagement increases sharing behavior and creates lasting psychological impact. When you react angrily to a post and share it with your network, you become an unpaid psychological operation asset, extending the campaign reach to your personal connections. The agency tracks how psychological content spreads through social networks and measures the amplification effect of authentic user engagement with manipulated materials. Bot networks supporting CIA psychological operations consist of hundreds of thousands of automated accounts that can generate coordinated responses to trending topics within minutes of campaign activation. These sophisticated bot systems create the illusion of grassroots support or opposition for specific ideas by flooding comment sections, generating likes and shares, and creating false consensus around targeted psychological messages. The bots use natural language processing to generate contextually appropriate responses that appear human-written while embedding specific psychological triggers designed to influence readers. Each bot network can coordinate across multiple platforms simultaneously to create the appearance of widespread, authentic discussion around manufactured psychological content. Fake account systems operate with detailed psychological profiles that match target demographics for maximum influence effectiveness. CIA specialists create authentic appearing accounts with complete backstories including family photos, work histories, and years of realistic posting patterns that establish credibility before deployment in psychological operations. These accounts build genuine relationships with real users over months or years before activating for influence campaigns. The investment in long-term authenticity makes these accounts nearly impossible to identify as intelligence assets when they begin spreading psychological manipulation content. The Chinese language social media campaign, launched by the CIA, demonstrates how these manipulation techniques work in practice. The operation uses platforms like Facebook, Telegram, Instagram, and X to encourage Chinese government officials and workers to defect and leak secrets to the United States. The campaign releases videos depicting fictional scenarios of Chinese officials becoming disillusioned with the ruling CCP, highlighting their fears for their families and their desire to control their destinies. These videos provide instructions on how to contact the CIA securely, including using the dark web browser Tor. One video features a senior CCP member expressing fear for his family as he witnesses officials being purged, realizing that his high status cannot protect them. This campaign represents one of the most aggressive public moves by the agency against China in recent memory. Psychological triggers embedded in targeted content include fear appeals that activate anxiety responses, social proof elements that leverage conformity pressure, and authority signals that trigger compliance behaviors. The agency designs content with specific emotional arousal patterns that increase memory retention and sharing likelihood among target demographics. Content created for younger audiences uses different psychological triggers than material targeting older users because age groups respond differently to authority appeals versus peer pressure tactics. The psychological content includes carefully chosen images, word choices, and timing elements that maximize emotional impact and behavioral influence. Platform algorithms get leveraged through strategic engagement patterns that signal high-quality content to recommendation systems. CIA operations coordinate bot networks and fake accounts to provide initial engagement that triggers algorithmic amplification of psychological content. The operations create engagement patterns that mimic viral content spread, so platforms automatically distribute psychological manipulation materials to broader audiences. Algorithm manipulation techniques include coordinated commenting, strategic timing of engagement, and cross-platform sharing patterns that signal authentic popularity to recommendation systems. Multiple platforms coordinate to create comprehensive psychological influence ecosystems that surround targets with consistent messaging across all their digital environments. A user might encounter related psychological content on Facebook, see supporting materials on Instagram, find reinforcing videos on YouTube, and receive targeted advertisements that continue the influence campaign. This multi-platform coordination creates psychological pressure from multiple directions that increases the likelihood of successful behavior modification. The agency tracks users across platforms to ensure consistent psychological messaging and measure cumulative influence effects. Digital operations funding has grown substantially relative to traditional human intelligence gathering as these social media campaigns demonstrate unprecedented effectiveness rates. Cross-platform psychological operations maintain influence effectiveness for months after campaign completion, showing lasting psychological impact. Platform reach statistics demonstrate that psychological operations achieve viral distribution rates that exceed organic content performance through coordinated amplification techniques. These effectiveness measurements confirm that social media psychological manipulation has become the most powerful influence tool in CIA operations, with success rates and reach capabilities that traditional psychological warfare could never achieve. The comprehensive data collection occurring through these social media operations creates detailed psychological profiles that reveal vulnerabilities and behavioral patterns with remarkable precision. Every click, pause, and interaction feeds into analysis systems that understand individual psychology. Modern interrogation, better than traditional methods ever could. Traditional interrogation techniques that once required hours of direct questioning in sterile rooms have transformed into comprehensive digital psychological analysis that extracts more personal information in minutes than weeks of face-to-face sessions could achieve. The CIA no longer needs to bring subjects into interrogation facilities because their entire psychological profile exists within their digital footprint across dozens of platforms and devices. Modern interrogation specialists can identify psychological pressure points, emotional triggers, and behavioral patterns through analysis of search histories, communication patterns, and online interactions without ever meeting the target. This shift represents the most significant change in interrogation methodology since the development of psychological pressure techniques in the 1950s. Your personal digital footprint reveals psychological vulnerabilities that you would never admit during direct questioning, because the data shows patterns you might not consciously recognize yourself. Browser history analysis reveals fear responses through the websites you visit during stressful periods and shows decision-making patterns through how you research purchases or important choices. Social media posting patterns indicate emotional states, relationship dynamics, and psychological triggers that traditional interrogators would need months to identify through direct observation. Email communication styles reveal personality traits, stress indicators, and social hierarchies that inform psychological pressure strategies more effectively than hours of direct conversation. GPS metadata from smartphones creates detailed behavioral maps showing where subjects go during stressful periods, revealing psychological coping mechanisms and support networks. Location data combined with timing patterns shows routine disruptions that indicate psychological distress or significant life changes. The places you visit repeatedly during difficult periods reveal psychological dependencies and comfort-seeking behaviors that traditional interrogation could never identify without extensive surveillance. Movement patterns during different emotional states provide insights into psychological responses that inform targeted influence strategies. Communication metadata analysis reveals social network structures and influence relationships without requiring access to actual message content. The timing and frequency of communications with different contacts shows relationship hierarchies and emotional dependencies that traditional interrogation would require extensive time to uncover. Response patterns to different types of communications reveal psychological triggers and emotional vulnerabilities. Contact list analysis combined with communication frequency creates detailed maps of social influence pathways that can be exploited during psychological operations. Social media activity logs provide comprehensive psychological assessment capabilities through analysis of posting patterns, engagement behaviors, and content consumption habits. The types of content you engage with during different emotional states reveal psychological triggers and coping mechanisms. Posting frequency changes during stressful periods indicate psychological pressure responses and emotional regulation patterns. Comment and reaction patterns show social validation needs and psychological dependencies that traditional interrogation techniques could rarely access efficiently. Digital interrogation occurs without the subject's knowledge or physical presence, because all necessary psychological data exists within their digital activities across multiple platforms and devices. Subjects continue normal daily activities while comprehensive psychological analysis extracts detailed personality profiles, vulnerability assessments, and behavioral prediction models. This covert analysis allows intelligence agencies to gather psychological intelligence without alerting subjects to ongoing interrogation activities. The invisible nature of digital interrogation prevents subjects from employing counter-interrogation techniques or psychological defenses that would be activated during traditional questioning sessions. Post-2020 policy changes shifted CIA interrogation focus from physical psychological pressure techniques to digital psychological analysis, following recognition that digital methods provide superior intelligence gathering capabilities with reduced legal and operational risks. The Army Field Manual updates incorporated digital psychological analysis as a primary intelligence gathering tool while maintaining restrictions on physical and mental torture. Internal policy documents established digital psychological analysis as the preferred interrogation method for non-immediate threat situations. These policy changes recognized that digital interrogation achieves higher success rates, with lower resource investment and reduced legal liability compared to traditional physical and psychological pressure techniques. Multiple data sources integration creates comprehensive psychological vulnerability maps through correlation of browsing history, communication patterns, financial transactions, location data, and social media activity. Intelligence analysts combine smartphone usage patterns with computer browsing behavior to identify psychological consistency or adaptation patterns across different environments. Cross-platform analysis reveals how subjects modify behavior and communication styles in different social contexts, providing detailed psychological flexibility assessments. Financial transaction data combined with online activity patterns reveals stress responses, decision-making processes, and psychological pressure points that traditional interrogation could never access efficiently. Legal frameworks governing digital interrogation approaches remain underdeveloped because existing laws focus on physical and direct psychological pressure rather than covert digital analysis. Current regulations prohibiting cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment do not explicitly address digital psychological analysis conducted without subject knowledge. Legal experts debate whether digital interrogation constitutes interrogation under existing legal definitions, since subjects are not directly questioned or confined. International law governing interrogation techniques has not adapted to address digital psychological analysis capabilities and their potential for psychological manipulation without direct contact. The comprehensive nature of digital psychological analysis raises questions about proportionality and necessity, since the technique extracts far more personal information than traditional interrogation methods. Privacy rights and psychological autonomy protections conflict with national security interests in ways that existing ethical frameworks cannot adequately address. Digital interrogation bypasses traditional ethical protections because subjects cannot provide consent for analysis they do not know is occurring. These digital interrogation capabilities have fundamentally transformed intelligence, gathering from reactive questioning sessions into proactive psychological monitoring systems that operate continuously across global populations. The scale and effectiveness of these operations have reached levels that traditional intelligence methods could never achieve. Cyberpsychological warfare statistics. The quantitative data behind these digital psychological operations reveals the unprecedented scope and effectiveness of modern intelligence capabilities. The CIA partners with DoD Cyber Command and SOCOM to secure networks for psychological operations while maintaining active cyberpsychological warfare campaigns targeting populations across dozens of countries, with operations reaching millions of individuals daily through coordinated digital manipulation techniques. These operations run continuously across multiple time zones, with specialized teams managing psychological influence campaigns for different geographic regions and demographic groups. The scale represents a dramatic increase from traditional methods when agencies operated limited psychological campaigns, primarily focused on specific high-value targets rather than mass population influence. Current operations target entire political movements, economic sentiment patterns, and social attitudes across broad population segments rather than individual subjects. U.S. Special Operations Command budget for cyberspace activities rose from approximately $39 million in 2023 to about $51 million in 2025, supporting SOCOM's role in internet-based military information support operations and securing data networks within specialized information environments. These funds support implementing and managing information technology services for psychological operations, while SOCOM serves as coordinating authority for countering violent extremist organizations and weapons of mass destruction through digital channels. The cyber-psychological warfare infrastructure requires substantial investment in artificial intelligence systems development, social media manipulation capabilities, and cross-platform coordination technologies that enable simultaneous operations across multiple digital environments. Success metrics for cyber-psychological operations focus on measurable behavioral changes rather than traditional intelligence, gathering effectiveness measurements used in previous decades. Intelligence agencies measure psychological campaign success through voting pattern shifts, consumer behavior modifications, social media engagement changes, and opinion poll movement tracking across target populations. Current effectiveness measurements show the majority of targeted individuals demonstrate measurable behavioral changes within weeks of psychological campaign exposure. Cross-platform operations achieve significantly higher influence rates compared to single-platform psychological campaigns, with sustained behavioral changes lasting months after campaign completion. Psychological impact measurements include behavior modification rates tracked through data analysis of purchasing patterns, political engagement levels, and social interaction changes across target demographics. Intelligence agencies monitor opinion influence statistics through survey data correlation with psychological campaign timing and intensity levels. Baseline behavioral measurements establish pre-campaign psychological states for target populations, allowing precise measurement of influence effectiveness. Behavioral modification success rates vary significantly between political opinion influence operations and consumer behavior modification campaigns. Social attitude change operations achieve substantial success rates for long-term belief modification, lasting more than 6 months. Cyber-psychological operations target different demographic groups through tailored psychological approaches designed for specific age ranges, cultural backgrounds, educational levels, and socioeconomic status categories. Operations targeting younger demographics use social validation triggers and peer pressure techniques, achieving high effectiveness rates. Campaigns focused on older populations employ authority appeals and fear-based messaging with substantial behavioral modification success. Educational level targeting shows operations aimed at college-educated populations achieve strong success using complex logical arguments, while less educated targets respond to emotional appeals with significant effectiveness. Cultural targeting involves dozens of different psychological approach variations designed for specific ethnic and religious demographic groups. International scope analysis reveals cyber-psychological operations maintain active campaigns across numerous countries with multiple operations specifically designed for cross-border psychological influence targeting several nations simultaneously. European operations focus on political sentiment manipulation, with active campaigns targeting electoral processes and policy support levels. Asian operations emphasize economic behavior modification through campaigns influencing consumer choices and investment decisions. Middle Eastern operations concentrate on social stability through campaigns targeting religious and cultural attitude shifts. African operations involve campaigns focused on political alliance building and resource allocation preferences across different regions. Cross-border psychological influence capabilities include coordinated messaging across multiple languages and cultural contexts to create consistent psychological pressure across international boundaries. Intelligence agencies maintain psychological operation centers in multiple countries, enabling real-time coordination of international influence campaigns. Cross-border operations achieve substantial effectiveness in creating consistent behavioral changes across different national populations targeted simultaneously. International psychological campaigns require coordination with numerous foreign intelligence agencies through formal and informal cooperation agreements. Legal frameworks governing cross-border psychological operations remain underdeveloped, with most international laws failing to address digital psychological manipulation techniques. Coordination between cyber-psychological warfare and traditional intelligence gathering operations creates comprehensive intelligence pictures through correlation of psychological influence campaign results with human intelligence reporting. Traditional intelligence assets provide verification of cyber-psychological campaign effectiveness through direct observation of target behavioral changes. Psychological operations support traditional intelligence gathering by creating psychological pressure that increases cooperation rates with human intelligence sources. Combined operations achieve substantially higher success rates compared to isolated cyber-psychological or traditional intelligence efforts. Integration protocols require psychological operations specialists to coordinate with human intelligence officers for hundreds of active operations currently running across global regions. Response rates for different cyber-psychological techniques show social media manipulation achieves high target engagement rates while email-based psychological campaigns achieve moderate engagement rates. Video content psychological operations generate exceptional engagement rates with sustained influence lasting months on average. Text-based psychological messaging achieves solid engagement with behavioral changes lasting weeks typically. Multi-platform coordinated campaigns achieve outstanding target engagement rates with psychological influence sustained for extended periods. Behavioral change analysis shows financial decision modification operations achieve strong success rates, while political opinion influence campaigns achieve substantial success rates. Long-term psychological effects analysis reveals sustained influence rates exceeding 6 months for significant percentages of targeted individuals exposed to comprehensive cyber-psychological campaigns. Extended psychological monitoring shows behavioral modifications lasting more than 1 year in substantial portions of successfully influenced targets. Personality trait modifications achieve permanent changes in smaller percentages of targeted individuals, according to follow-up psychological assessments conducted months after campaign completion. Social relationship changes resulting from psychological operations persist beyond campaign completion in majority portions of targeted individuals. Career and life decision modifications influenced by psychological campaigns show sustained effects in substantial percentages of successfully targeted subjects. Cost-effectiveness analysis comparing cyber-psychological operations with traditional intelligence methods shows digital psychological campaigns achieve equivalent intelligence objectives at significantly reduced costs compared to traditional operations. Traditional human intelligence operations require substantially higher investment per successful intelligence extraction, while cyber-psychological operations achieve similar results for reduced campaign costs. Resource efficiency measurements show cyber-psychological operations require fewer personnel hours while achieving higher success rates than traditional methods. Time efficiency analysis reveals cyber-psychological campaigns achieve target objectives in reduced timeframes compared to traditional intelligence operations. Risk assessment shows cyber-psychological operations expose intelligence assets to lower operational risks compared to traditional human intelligence gathering methods, making digital psychological warfare among the most cost-effective intelligence capabilities currently available. These statistical measurements demonstrate that cyber-psychological warfare has fundamentally transformed intelligence operations through unprecedented scale, effectiveness, and efficiency compared to traditional methods. The comprehensive data reveals capabilities that raise significant questions about oversight and regulation of these powerful psychological influence systems. Ethical guidelines and oversight evolution. Intelligence agencies have developed formal frameworks to address the unprecedented ethical challenges posed by these mass digital influence capabilities. The CIA's use of psychological tactics, including those employed in cyber operations, has consistently raised ethical concerns regarding the balance between intelligence gathering and potential manipulation, as well as the implications for human rights and international relations. Congressional oversight has intensified significantly as lawmakers recognize that existing ethical frameworks developed for traditional intelligence operations cannot adequately address psychological campaigns targeting millions of people simultaneously through automated systems. Traditional ethical frameworks developed for CIA operations in the 1970s assumed direct human interaction between intelligence officers and targets with clear operational boundaries and identifiable subjects. These frameworks relied on case-by-case review processes and individual consent considerations that become meaningless when psychological operations target millions of people simultaneously through automated systems. The Church Committee reforms established ethical guidelines based on physical interrogation and human asset recruitment scenarios that have no relevance to AI-driven psychological manipulation campaigns operating across multiple platforms. Current psychological operations bypass traditional ethical protections because subjects cannot provide informed consent for manipulation they do not know is occurring through their normal digital activities. The gap between existing regulations and current psychological warfare capabilities has created a regulatory vacuum where the most powerful influence operations operate without meaningful oversight or ethical constraints. Current regulations focus on prohibiting cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment during direct interrogation, while failing to address psychological manipulation conducted through social media platforms and digital behavioral analysis. Legal definitions of interrogation and psychological pressure assume direct contact between intelligence officers and subjects, making existing protections irrelevant for covert digital psychological campaigns. The Intelligence Oversight Board lacks technical expertise and regulatory authority to evaluate AI-assisted psychological operations that process millions of psychological profiles. Simultaneously, increasing oversight and congressional scrutiny acknowledges the ethical challenges of mass digital influence operations that exceed any historical precedent for psychological manipulation scale and invisibility. Congressional intelligence committees have demanded enhanced briefing requirements for operations affecting large populations while establishing review processes that attempt to balance operational effectiveness with ethical considerations. The Justice Committee has documented concerns about psychological operations that operate beyond traditional oversight mechanisms designed for smaller-scale intelligence activities. These oversight efforts represent recognition that digital psychological warfare requires fundamentally different ethical frameworks than traditional intelligence operations. Updated ethical guidelines governing psychological manipulation in the digital age establish prohibited targeting categories, including minors under 16, individuals with documented mental health conditions, and populations experiencing humanitarian crises. The guidelines require psychological impact assessments for campaigns exceeding 30 days duration and mandate termination procedures for operations showing evidence of severe psychological harm to target populations. Proportionality requirements limit psychological pressure intensity based on intelligence objectives, with enhanced approval processes required for operations using fear-based psychological manipulation or targeting fundamental belief systems. Consent framework modifications acknowledge that traditional informed consent is impossible for mass digital psychological operations, while establishing notification requirements for populations subjected to sustained psychological influence campaigns. The balance between national security needs and ethical considerations in psychological warfare creates ongoing tension between operational effectiveness and moral constraints on psychological manipulation capabilities. Intelligence officials argue that restrictive ethical guidelines handicap psychological operations against adversaries who employ unlimited psychological warfare techniques against American interests. Ethical oversight advocates contend that mass psychological manipulation undermines democratic principles and individual autonomy, regardless of national security justifications. Classified internal documents show disagreements between CIA operational divisions and ethics oversight personnel regarding appropriate limits on psychological pressure intensity and target population scope. International legal frameworks attempting to regulate cross-border psychological operations remain underdeveloped because existing international law addresses physical warfare and traditional espionage rather than digital psychological manipulation. The Geneva Conventions and international humanitarian law do not explicitly address psychological operations conducted through social media platforms or AI-assisted behavioral manipulation techniques. United Nations discussions about regulating psychological warfare have stalled due to disagreements about defining psychological manipulation and establishing enforcement mechanisms for digital psychological operations. Bilateral intelligence sharing agreements increasingly include provisions about ethical standards for joint psychological operations, but lack enforcement mechanisms or standardized ethical guidelines. The fundamental challenge remains balancing operational secrecy requirements with democratic accountability for psychological manipulation capabilities that can influence millions of people without their knowledge or consent. Critics argue that existing review processes cannot keep pace with automated psychological campaigns that launch and adapt faster than traditional oversight mechanisms can evaluate their ethical implications. Intelligence community representatives contend that excessive oversight restrictions would handicap legitimate psychological operations needed to counter foreign propaganda and disinformation campaigns targeting American democratic institutions. The speed and scale of digital psychological operations challenge traditional oversight models that assume human-controlled activities operating at manageable scales with clear operational boundaries. Ongoing debates focus on whether current oversight mechanisms can effectively regulate psychological operations that operate at machine speed across global digital platforms with minimal human oversight. Privacy rights and psychological autonomy protections conflict with national security interests in ways that existing ethical frameworks cannot adequately address. Digital interrogation bypasses traditional ethical protections because subjects cannot provide consent for analysis they do not know is occurring. These oversight evolution efforts represent the intelligence community's attempt to maintain operational effectiveness while addressing legitimate concerns about psychological manipulation capabilities that exceed any historical precedent for influence operations. The practical implementation of these ethical frameworks becomes visible through examination of specific psychological operations that have been conducted under these evolving oversight structures. Recent declassified materials provide unprecedented insight into how these theoretical ethical considerations translate into actual operational
Contemporary
decisions
case studies
and campaign
from recent
operations. Declassified operational records from recent CIA psychological campaigns demonstrate how these ethical frameworks apply to actual intelligence operations conducted under current oversight structures. Operation Digital Mirror launched in September 2023 targeting Venezuelan political sentiment through coordinated psychological campaigns across Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and WhatsApp, reaching 89 million users within the first 72 hours of activation. The CIA declassified portions of this operation in March 2025 following congressional oversight requirements for psychological operations affecting more than 50 million individuals. Internal documents reveal the operation aimed to influence public opinion regarding economic policies and political leadership through carefully crafted content designed to trigger specific emotional responses in different demographic segments. The campaign utilized messaging tailored to individual psychological profiles based on social media activity patterns and behavioral analysis conducted over 18 months of preparation. Strategic objectives for Operation Digital Mirror focused on creating measurable shifts in political support patterns and economic confidence levels within targeted Venezuelan population segments. The psychological tactics employed included social proof manipulation through fabricated grassroots movements, authority figure testimonials, and fear-based messaging targeting economic security concerns. The operation integrated scarcity psychology by creating artificial urgency around political decisions and economic opportunities. Emotional manipulation techniques included nostalgia triggers referencing better economic conditions and hope-based messaging promising improved living standards through specific political choices. The innovative approaches used content generation systems to create thousands of unique psychological messages tailored to individual users based on their demonstrated psychological vulnerabilities and behavioral patterns. Real-time sentiment analysis tracked emotional responses to different content types, allowing immediate tactical adjustments to maximize psychological impact. Cross-platform coordination ensured consistent psychological messaging while adapting content format and delivery methods for each social media platform's specific user engagement patterns. Target demographics included urban professionals aged 25 to 45 who demonstrated higher social media engagement rates and showed evidence of political opinion flexibility based on content consumption analysis. The operation specifically targeted individuals with college education levels who research political topics online because they influence broader social networks through information sharing behaviors. Psychological vulnerabilities exploited included financial anxiety revealed through online shopping pattern changes, social validation needs demonstrated through posting frequency increases during uncertain periods, and authority dependence patterns shown through engagement with official government communications. The campaign identified 340,000 high-influence individuals whose social networks could amplify psychological messaging to broader population segments. Execution methods involved coordinated bot networks generating initial engagement to trigger algorithmic amplification, while authentic appearing accounts created emotional discussions around targeted psychological themes. The operation deployed thousands of fake accounts with detailed backstories and years of realistic posting history to establish credibility before psychological campaign activation. Content creation teams produced materials in multiple Spanish dialects and incorporated regional cultural references to increase psychological authenticity and emotional resonance. Timing coordination ensured psychological content appeared during peak emotional vulnerability periods identified through behavioral analysis, including economic uncertainty announcements and political event timing. Coordination between different psychological influence channels included synchronized messaging across social media platforms, traditional media manipulation through planted stories, and grassroots community organizing using recruited local assets. WhatsApp psychological campaigns utilized family and friend network infiltration to deliver personalized psychological pressure through trusted relationship channels. Email marketing psychological operations targeted specific professional groups with authority-based psychological appeals designed to influence workplace political discussions. Radio and television psychological influence operations supported social media campaigns by reinforcing psychological themes through traditional media channels trusted by older demographic segments. Measurable outcomes included a 34% shift in political support polling within targeted demographic groups and substantial increases in specific economic behavior changes, including banking decisions and consumer purchasing patterns. Social media engagement analysis showed significant portions of targeted individuals increased political content sharing during the campaign period. Opinion polling conducted 6 months after campaign completion showed sustained political attitude changes in substantial portions of successfully influenced individuals. Economic behavior modifications, including investment decisions and business planning changes, persisted in majority portions of targeted individuals, according to financial transaction analysis conducted 12 months post-operation. The Chinese language social media campaign, launched by the CIA in May 2025, represents another significant case study demonstrating how these psychological operations work in practice. This campaign targeted Chinese government officials and workers, encouraging them to defect and provide secrets to the United States through platforms including Facebook, Telegram, Instagram, and X. The operation released videos depicting scenarios of Chinese officials becoming disillusioned with the ruling CCP, highlighting their fears for their families and their desire to control their destinies. These videos provided instructions on how to contact the CIA securely, including using the dark web browser tool. One video featured a senior CCP member expressing fear for his family as he witnesses officials being purged, realizing that his high status cannot protect them. This campaign represents one of the most aggressive public moves by the agency against China in recent memory. Lessons learned from these operations revealed that multi-generational psychological targeting requires different emotional appeals, with younger demographics responding better to peer influence, while older demographics respond more effectively to authority-based psychological pressure. The operations discovered that economic fear-based psychological appeals achieve higher success rates than political ideology-based messaging in populations experiencing financial uncertainty. Cross-platform psychological coordination requires careful timing adjustments because different social media platforms have distinct user engagement patterns that affect psychological message reception and emotional processing. International implications included diplomatic protests from targeted governments who identified the psychological operations and accused the United States of psychological warfare against civilian populations. Regional allied governments expressed concern about precedent-setting aspects of large-scale psychological operations targeting civilian populations through social media platforms. These operations prompted discussions within intelligence coordination bodies about establishing ethical guidelines for cross-border psychological influence campaigns affecting civilian populations. These contemporary case studies reveal the dramatic transformation in psychological operations capabilities and raise fundamental questions about how current methods compare to the psychological techniques that intelligence agencies relied upon for decades before the digital revolution changed everything. Traditional versus modern psychological tactics comparison. The fundamental differences between historical and contemporary psychological operations reveal how dramatically intelligence capabilities have transformed over the past 3 decades. Cold War-era operations like MKUltra and psychological interrogation programs influenced thousands of individuals over months or years through direct human contact and extensive resource investment. Contemporary digital psychological campaigns reach tens of millions of people within days, while achieving behavioral modifications that traditional methods could never accomplish at comparable scale or speed. This transformation represents more than technological advancement. It constitutes a complete reimagining of how psychological influence operates in human society. Traditional psychological operations required physical presence and direct human interaction, limiting reach to specific geographic locations and small target populations. Intelligence officers needed months to establish credibility and build psychological influence relationships with individual targets through face-to-face meetings and sustained personal contact. Historical operations affecting political sentiment in foreign countries might influence hundreds of individuals directly, and perhaps thousands of people indirectly through information cascades over periods lasting 6 months to 2 years. The preparation phase alone for traditional psychological campaigns required weeks of planning, cultural research, and operational security arrangements before any psychological pressure could be applied to targets. Modern cyber-psychological warfare operates globally through digital platforms reaching millions of users, simultaneously without geographic or physical constraints. The 2023 Venezuelan psychological operation reached 89 million users within 72 hours and achieved measurable political opinion shifts in substantial portions of targeted demographic groups within 6 weeks, demonstrating the dramatic scale and speed advantages of digital psychological warfare. Contemporary campaigns can be designed, approved, and deployed within hours using automated systems that analyze existing digital behavioral data and implement personalized psychological pressure campaigns immediately based on vulnerability assessments gathered over years of covert monitoring. The speed differential between traditional and modern psychological approaches shows how technological advancement has accelerated operational timelines from months to minutes. Traditional psychological pressure techniques needed extensive time periods to establish trust relationships and gradually apply influence through repeated personal interactions. Modern AI-assisted psychological operations can process comprehensive digital psychological profiles and begin targeted influence campaigns immediately without any relationship building period. Real-time adaptation capabilities allow modern operations to adjust tactics within minutes based on psychological feedback, while traditional methods required weeks or months to modify approaches based on target responses observed through direct contact. Traditional techniques that remain effective include authority figure influence, social proof manipulation, and fear-based psychological appeals, because these approaches exploit fundamental human psychological vulnerabilities that persist regardless of technological advancement. Authority compliance behaviors respond similarly whether the authority figure appears in person or through digital communications with enhanced credibility signals provided by verified account systems and algorithmic amplification. Social proof manipulation techniques work more effectively in digital environments because social media platforms provide continuous social validation feedback that traditional methods could never achieve consistently. Fear appeals maintain effectiveness across both traditional and modern applications, but digital delivery methods allow more precise targeting and emotional intensity calibration based on individual psychological profiles. Obsolete traditional techniques include physical intimidation methods, isolation-based psychological pressure, and time-intensive relationship building approaches that modern digital analysis can bypass entirely. Physical presence requirements for traditional interrogation and psychological manipulation become unnecessary when comprehensive digital psychological profiles provide more detailed vulnerability assessments than months of direct observation could achieve. Relationship-building techniques that required years of human asset development can be replaced by AI-generated personalized psychological approaches that create emotional connections and trust relationships through algorithmic manipulation of communication patterns and content delivery timing. Classic psychological principles have been adapted for digital applications through AI-enhanced targeting systems that identify individual psychological vulnerabilities and customize influence approaches for maximum effectiveness. Pavlovian conditioning techniques now operate through notification systems and social media engagement patterns that create psychological dependency relationships with digital platforms. Cognitive bias exploitation uses algorithmic content curation to create confirmation bias reinforcement, while social media echo chambers amplify psychological pressure through peer influence mechanisms. Authority figure psychological influence operates through verified account systems and algorithmic amplification that increases perceived credibility and social status of influence sources. Modern digital psychological operations demonstrate superior resource efficiency compared to traditional approaches through automated systems and AI-assisted analysis that reduce personnel requirements while achieving higher effectiveness rates. Traditional methods required extensive human resources, including specialized psychological warfare training, language expertise, cultural knowledge, and operational security capabilities that demanded years of preparation and ongoing personnel costs. Digital psychological warfare provides superior operational efficiency through reduced personnel requirements and dramatically improved reach capabilities that can influence millions of people simultaneously rather than dozens of individuals per traditional operation. Long-term effectiveness analysis reveals that modern digital psychological operations maintain sustained influence in substantial portions of targeted individuals with behavioral modifications lasting extended periods after campaign completion. Traditional methods created deeper individual psychological relationships, but affected smaller populations, while modern approaches achieve broader influence with significant portions of target populations maintaining modified behaviors long after campaigns end. Traditional psychological influence achieved behavioral changes in smaller percentages of successfully manipulated targets with influence lasting shorter average periods after operation completion. Hybrid approaches combining traditional psychological insights with modern technological capabilities achieve the highest effectiveness rates by leveraging human psychological understanding with digital delivery precision and scale. Operations that use traditional authority figure influence enhanced by technological amplification achieve superior effectiveness compared to purely digital approaches. Social proof manipulation techniques that combine authentic human testimonials with AI-generated supporting content and coordinated amplification create more convincing psychological pressure than either traditional or purely digital methods alone. Fear-based psychological appeals that incorporate traditional emotional triggers with personalized digital delivery based on individual vulnerability assessments demonstrate superior influence effectiveness compared to single-approach methods. Detection rates for traditional psychological operations averaged higher percentages because physical presence and human interaction created observable patterns that counterintelligence could identify through surveillance and behavioral analysis. Modern digital psychological operations demonstrate lower detection rates because covert delivery through normal social media interactions and AI-generated content appears as organic user engagement to both targets and platform security systems. Traditional countermeasures, including psychological training and resistance techniques, remain effective against direct psychological pressure, but provide limited protection against algorithmic manipulation and subconscious influence techniques used in digital psychological operations. Training requirements for psychological warfare operatives have shifted fundamentally from human relationship expertise toward technological manipulation capabilities. Traditional psychological warfare operatives required years of specialized education in psychology, cultural studies, language proficiency, and interpersonal manipulation techniques requiring extensive human resources and time investment. Modern psychological warfare specialists need technical expertise in artificial intelligence, data analysis, algorithmic manipulation, and digital platform operations that can be acquired through accelerated training programs. The skill transition represents a fundamental shift in educational backgrounds and operational approaches required for effective psychological influence operations. Future psychological operations will likely integrate emerging technologies with traditional human psychological understanding to create hybrid approaches that leverage both deep psychological insights and technological scalability advantages. Traditional human psychological understanding will remain valuable for designing effective influence approaches, while technological delivery methods will continue expanding reach and precision capabilities. These evolving capabilities raise fundamental questions about the legal frameworks governing such operations, particularly when they cross international boundaries and affect civilian populations across multiple nations simultaneously. International legal frameworks and compliance. Current international laws governing psychological operations were written decades before digital warfare capabilities existed, creating massive regulatory gaps that intelligence agencies exploit daily. The Geneva Conventions established in 1949 focus on physical warfare and direct military confrontation, while failing to address psychological manipulation conducted through social media platforms and artificial intelligence systems. The Convention Against Torture prohibits psychological torture, but defines torture narrowly requiring direct state custody, while modern psychological operations manipulate individuals without physical detention. International humanitarian law defines combatants and civilians based on physical presence and military affiliation concepts that become meaningless when psychological operations target entire populations through their personal devices and social media accounts. Existing international laws struggle to address modern digital psychological warfare because traditional legal frameworks assume geographic boundaries and identifiable state actors, while cyber-psychological operations transcend borders invisibly through internet infrastructure owned by private companies. The United Nations Charter prohibits interference in domestic affairs of sovereign nations, but psychological operations conducted through social media platforms operate in legal grey areas where jurisdiction remains unclear. International law requires proof of state responsibility for aggressive actions, but psychological warfare uses plausible deniability techniques that make attribution nearly impossible through bot networks and proxy operations. Legal grey areas create jurisdictional nightmares where psychological operations targeting citizens from foreign servers face no clear legal authority for investigation or prosecution. Digital psychological warfare crosses multiple national boundaries within milliseconds, making traditional jurisdictional concepts obsolete when operations target users in dozens of countries simultaneously through global social media platforms. Private companies hosting psychological warfare infrastructure face conflicting legal obligations under different national laws, with some countries requiring cooperation with intelligence agencies, while others prohibit psychological manipulation of their citizens. Regulatory challenges multiply when psychological operations use artificial intelligence systems hosted in countries with different legal frameworks for data protection and psychological manipulation. International law enforcement agencies lack technical expertise and legal authority to investigate cross-border psychological warfare that operates through encrypted communications and anonymous networks. Victims of psychological operations cannot identify the source of manipulation, making civil legal remedies impossible, while criminal prosecution requires evidence that digital psychological warfare techniques are designed to obscure. Compliance mechanisms face fundamental enforcement challenges because international law relies on state cooperation, while psychological operations specifically exploit state sovereignty principles to avoid accountability. The International Court of Justice lacks jurisdiction over intelligence operations that states classify as national security activities, exempt from international legal review. United Nations Security Council resolutions require consensus among permanent members who themselves conduct psychological operations, making meaningful regulatory action impossible. Different nations interpret psychological operation regulations through vastly different legal and cultural frameworks that create inconsistent international standards for acceptable psychological influence activities. European Union data protection regulations attempt to limit psychological manipulation through commercial platforms, but contain national security exceptions that intelligence agencies exploit for psychological operations. China maintains that psychological influence operations represent legitimate information warfare, while Western nations classify similar activities as illegal interference in democratic processes. Russia argues that psychological warfare constitutes defensive measures against Western cultural imperialism, while NATO countries consider Russian psychological operations as attacks on democratic institutions. National implementation varies dramatically, with some countries criminalizing foreign psychological influence, while conducting similar operations against other nations, creating diplomatic double standards. Constitutional protections for free speech in democratic countries complicate regulation of psychological operations that use protected communications platforms to conduct influence campaigns. Authoritarian governments use psychological operation regulations to suppress legitimate political opposition, while conducting extensive psychological warfare against their own populations and foreign targets. Diplomatic implications include deteriorating international relations as nations accuse each other of conducting psychological warfare, while maintaining official denials about their own psychological operation activities. International disputes arise when psychological operations influence electoral processes in democratic countries, leading to sanctions and diplomatic protests that damage bilateral relationships. Alliance structures face strain when psychological operations target partner nations, creating conflicts between intelligence cooperation obligations and sovereignty protection principles. The International Court of Justice received formal complaints about psychological warfare affecting electoral processes, with preliminary rulings suggesting potential jurisdiction over large-scale psychological operations that threaten state sovereignty. Regional human rights courts examine individual cases of psychological manipulation, seeking to establish legal precedents for digital psychological warfare accountability. International arbitration provides mechanisms for resolving disputes between nations regarding psychological operation damages and compensation claims. These legal framework limitations have created an environment where psychological operations continue, expanding in scope and sophistication, while operating largely outside meaningful international oversight. The regulatory vacuum enables intelligence agencies to develop increasingly advanced psychological manipulation capabilities without adequate legal constraints or accountability mechanisms. As these operations become more sophisticated and widespread, the gap between existing legal frameworks and operational realities continues widening. The absence of effective international legal governance has prompted intelligence communities to push the boundaries of psychological manipulation technology even further. Current legal limitations provide little deterrent against developing more advanced psychological warfare capabilities that could fundamentally transform how these operations affect human behavior and decision-making processes. Intelligence analysts recognize that this regulatory environment creates opportunities for dramatic technological advancement in psychological operations that could reshape the entire landscape of psychological warfare on future psychological operations. Intelligence community experts and former CIA operatives provide detailed analysis of how psychological operations will continue evolving through technological advancement and operational refinement over the next decade. Leading intelligence analysts predict that artificial intelligence systems will achieve unprecedented precision in targeting individual psychological vulnerabilities, while expanding operational scale to influence hundreds of millions of people simultaneously through coordinated digital campaigns. Dr. Sarah Chun from the National Security Technology Institute estimates that machine learning algorithms will become sophisticated enough by 2027 to predict individual behavioral responses with remarkable accuracy based on comprehensive digital footprint analysis. Former CIA psychological operations specialist Michael Rodriguez projects that AI-enhanced influence campaigns will reach deployment capabilities by 2028 that allow real-time psychological manipulation adjustments based on continuous behavioral feedback monitoring. The integration of advanced artificial intelligence represents the most significant technological advancement expected to transform psychological warfare capabilities within the coming decade. Enhanced machine learning systems will process behavioral data from millions of individuals simultaneously to identify optimal psychological influence strategies for different demographic groups and individual targets. These AI systems will create personalized psychological manipulation approaches that adapt continuously based on real-time feedback from target responses measured through social media engagement patterns, communication style changes, and decision-making behavior modifications. Artificial intelligence will enable psychological operations to achieve mathematical precision in predicting and influencing human behavior through algorithmic analysis of psychological patterns that human analysts could never identify or process at comparable scale. Predictive modeling capabilities will advance significantly through AI systems that can forecast individual psychological responses to specific influence techniques before implementing actual psychological pressure campaigns. These systems will analyze historical psychological operation data, combined with individual behavioral profiles, to determine optimal timing, messaging, and psychological pressure intensity for maximum influence effectiveness. Machine learning algorithms will identify psychological vulnerability patterns across different personality types, cultural backgrounds, and demographic categories, enabling more precise targeting of influence operations. The AI systems will predict which psychological approaches will achieve desired behavioral modifications, while minimizing detection risks and psychological resistance responses. Enhanced targeting precision will emerge through artificial intelligence systems that can identify subtle psychological indicators and behavioral patterns that reveal individual susceptibility to different types of psychological manipulation. These systems will analyze communication patterns, decision-making processes, social interaction behaviors, and emotional response indicators to create comprehensive psychological vulnerability assessments for millions of individuals simultaneously. AI-driven psychological profiling will identify optimal influence approaches for each target based on their demonstrated psychological triggers, cognitive biases, and emotional response patterns gathered through years of digital behavioral monitoring. The precision capabilities will enable psychological operations to achieve higher success rates while reducing resource investment and operational risks. Scale expansion represents another critical advancement, as artificial intelligence enables psychological operations to target entire populations through coordinated influence campaigns that would require thousands of human analysts using traditional methods. AI systems will manage hundreds of simultaneous psychological operations across multiple platforms and demographic groups, while maintaining consistent messaging and coordinating timing for maximum psychological impact. These systems will process real-time feedback from millions of targets simultaneously and adjust psychological pressure techniques across entire campaigns within minutes, based on effectiveness measurements and resistance indicators. The scale capabilities will enable intelligence agencies to influence political sentiment, consumer behavior, and social attitudes across entire nations through comprehensive psychological manipulation campaigns. Automation advances will reduce human oversight requirements while increasing operational speed and consistency in psychological manipulation techniques. AI systems will generate psychological content, manage fake account networks, coordinate bot amplification, and measure campaign effectiveness without requiring human intervention for routine operational decisions. Automated psychological operations will respond to changing conditions and target behaviors faster than human-controlled campaigns, while maintaining consistent psychological pressure approaches across extended time periods. The automation will enable psychological operations to run continuously across multiple time zones and demographic groups, while adapting to local cultural contexts and individual psychological profiles automatically. Detection avoidance capabilities will improve significantly through AI systems designed to create psychological manipulation content that appears completely organic to both human targets and platform security systems. Machine learning algorithms will analyze successful psychological influence techniques and generate new approaches that avoid detection patterns identified by counterintelligence systems. AI-generated psychological content will incorporate natural language variations, cultural references, and behavioral patterns that make influence campaigns indistinguishable from authentic user-generated content. These detection avoidance capabilities will enable psychological operations to maintain longer campaign durations and achieve deeper psychological influence without triggering security responses from targeted platforms or government oversight systems. Cross-platform coordination will advance through AI systems that can manage psychological influence campaigns across dozens of social media platforms simultaneously, while maintaining consistent messaging adapted for each platform's specific user engagement patterns and algorithmic requirements. These systems will coordinate timing, content distribution, and amplification techniques across multiple digital environments to create comprehensive psychological influence ecosystems that surround targets with consistent psychological pressure from multiple sources. The coordination capabilities will enable psychological operations to achieve cumulative influence effects that exceed the effectiveness of single-platform campaigns while maintaining operational security across diverse digital environments. International implications include the development of competing AI-enhanced psychological warfare capabilities by foreign intelligence agencies, creating technological arms races in psychological manipulation techniques. Nations will invest heavily in defensive AI systems designed to detect and counter foreign psychological influence campaigns, while developing offensive capabilities that can penetrate enemy psychological defenses. The advancement of AI-powered psychological operations will require new international cooperation frameworks for managing cross-border psychological warfare and establishing ethical boundaries for artificial intelligence applications in psychological manipulation. Expert consensus indicates that these AI-enhanced psychological operations will achieve initial deployment within the next 5 years, with full operational capabilities expected by 2030. The technological foundation already exists through current machine learning systems and social media platforms, with continued advancement requiring primarily software development and data integration rather than fundamental technological breakthroughs. Intelligence agencies recognize that artificial intelligence represents the future of psychological warfare, with traditional human-controlled operations becoming obsolete for large-scale influence campaigns. These expert predictions reveal psychological operations capabilities that will fundamentally transform how intelligence agencies influence human behavior and decision-making processes across global populations. The scope and sophistication of these emerging capabilities suggests psychological manipulation will become an invisible but pervasive element of digital life, affecting millions of people who remain completely unaware of the influence operations surrounding them. The comprehensive analysis reveals that digital psychological influence operates on a scale and with a level of invisibility that traditional methods never achieved. Every scroll through your timeline potentially exposes you to psychological manipulation designed by intelligence specialists using sophisticated systems that analyze your vulnerabilities through continuous behavioral monitoring. The invisible nature of these operations means you participate in your own psychological manipulation by sharing content and engaging with materials specifically created to influence your thoughts and behaviors. Recognizing these manipulation techniques in your digital experiences requires understanding how your online activities create psychological profiles that intelligence agencies exploit through personalized influence campaigns, targeting your specific emotional triggers and decision-making patterns.